talk about this? Because I'm going to be talking about Monster. Hey guys, Moo here. Guess what? I just finished reading on Kindle Unlimited. Sweet Berries by C.M. Noscosta. Now, if I pronounced your name wrong, I am so sorry. The synopsis of this story is Grace is an event planner at a farm. And she ends up getting so pent up that she ends up having some fun time in front of her gigantic window, and someone is watching her. So that's the synopsis. But let's get into it, okay? So the story starts off that we are introduced to the main character, Grace. She's actually human, living in a world full of mythical creatures. So there is kitsunes, orcs, tieflings, nymphs, monitars, centaurs, and a lot of animal people and insect people. So at her job, she flirts a lot with one of the monitars. And I forgot his name, and honestly, after she ends up meeting Merrick, he kind of disappears from the story. But she has like this really big flirtation with him, and it's like on the edge of them being very sexual with each other. We also find out that she used to be married to a monitor, and that her marriage was actually like she had no more love for her husband and she just left and divorced him. And we actually never ever encountered the husband, which is really great. So at one point in the story, they end up going to a bar, her and her co-workers, and she has a co-worker that's her best friend, that's a nymph, and her co-worker's like, you should just sleep with him, you should just sleep with him. And Grace is like, no, I don't want to sleep with my co-workers because that brings problems. So the monitor that she's really into at work is like, meet me in the bathroom, blah blah blah, going home, and she ends up helping herself in front of a window that has no curtains or anything, and she has a feeling that someone's watching her, but she's too horny to think. So after that, the next day, she goes back, and her coworker continue on that little flirtation on the verge of, and then she again gets too horny to think, so she ends up going home. So she does it again. But this time she sees it's somebody watching her. And like voyager she is, she opens the window to let whoever's outside inside to help her. And I'm just like, oh my god. So, it being a fictional story, I was like, ooh, oh my god, ooh, right? But in real life, I was like, oh my god, girl, you're gonna let someone you have no idea in your house? What if he kills you? What if he gives you an STI? What if, all like those real life emotions I have about this stuff. But reading that at that time, I was like, ooh, I was like, okay, that good for you. So the person ends up helping her out, and then she ends up passing out because I guess he was really good at it. And then she ends up waking up, going back to work, and at this time we meet Merrick, the Mothman. And it turns out he was the one that actually helped himself to her that night. And she's like, oh my god, what are you doing here? And then he's like, oh, well, I like you. And he's... Merrick is just adorable, honestly. He is shy, he is bumbling, he is a scientist, he is just so cute. He's one of my favorite monster boyfriends. So then at this point, Jessica ends up meeting him and talking, and then she has this mindset in her head, here for a fun time, not a long time. So basically she just wants to have fun with Merrick because he is just staying for a certain amount of months and then he's leaving. And she's like, yes, that's perfect for me. But throughout their courtship, she ends up slowly falling in love with him. And there were some really cute scenes, like really cute domestic scenes, and them actually showing the audience a growing relationship. And I really like that when it comes to romance. There is a happy ending, which is great. The only thing I didn't really like about Grace is that Merrick doesn't really wear clothes. And he even states why. I'm covered in fur, and like his thing is in a pocket, so it opens and it comes out when he needs to use it. So he's like, what's the point? But the thing I didn't like about Grace is she was constantly like, oh, don't you want to wear clothes? Don't you want to fit in? Don't you want to do this? And it kind of brought me out of the story because it reminded me of my dad, and my dad was like that. And I was just like, Grace, leave Merrick alone. If you really loved him, you wouldn't really care about that shit because I'm really touchy with stuff like that. Anyway, so then at this point, she's actually hosting a wedding for a kitsune, and she ends up talking to the kitsune and telling her, you know, you should do this, do this, do this. And it was basically like her having a realization how hypocritical she was being with Merrick and with her marriage, and how she was being not true to herself. And then at the same time, one of her friends ended up telling her about a scientist that got funding for something he's doing that was really similar to Merrick's line of work. And she ended up having this thought that he was going to South America. So she ends up realizing in the moment where after the wedding and the bride and the groom are dancing and having fun, that she's in love with Merrick. So she ends up running to his, like driving to his house and climbing. And the funny thing about Merrick is he lives in a tree house, like a literal tree house, like it's so far off the ground, so she has to climb all these steps. So she ends up climbing, and this part was so secondhand embarrassing because she ends up admitting that she loves him, that he can't leave, and that, you know, all of this stuff. And he's like, what are you talking about? I'm not going to South America. Didn't you hear me? Don't you ever hear me when I talk? And I'm like, oh my God, how embarrassing. Ah, Merrick, you're so cute. And then it kind of ends there. Like, it was kind of abrupt. I was like, I know we got a little taste of the relationship, but I would like at least an epilogue to see how the two are doing afterwards, you know. There were some really cute scenes, I'm not gonna lie. My favorite scenes were them being on dates and being kind of domestic, because I live for that shit. I love that. Except the part at the grocery store, I was like, oh my God, they're at the grocery store, how cute. This girl is too horny for her own good. Like, she was ruining that scene because of how horny she was. And being really like graphic, and there are these two vampires that are eavesdropping on them, and she was doing that in front of them, and I'm like, you, this would have been a really cute scene, but you kind of ruined it with your horniness. And I understand that this is like a monster romance, and there are some indie authors that do like to write romance and have sexual stuff in it, but I really felt like this scene would have been cute if it was just the main character not being that horny. The writing, surprisingly, is actually really good for being a indie author. I have read my share of indie authors on Kindle Unlimited, and some of them weren't that great, but this actually was pretty good because we had world building, we had the character growth. There were some things that did bring me out of the story, because we'll be at a certain moment with Grace, and then the next few pages she's talking about something that happened before, and it was like a flashback, but there's no indication that it's a flashback, and you're just like, wait, what's going on? And then when we get back to the moment, you're just, oh, that's a flashback. So that's the only thing that brought me out of the story. I haven't read the actual first book. It's called the Cambric Creek series, so apparently there's a first book and Sweetberries is the second book, and I didn't read the first book, and I was like, oops. So I'll actually get to that. Now, if you want to get into monster romances, I would suggest this to be one of your very first, because what I do enjoy about this book is that it's not very heavy on lore. It goes straight into the characters' wants, straight into the meat, and then straight into building a relationship throughout this story, which is really cute. Like I did say that there are some things that I think that the author could work on, just indicating that it's a flashback, honestly. And I know it's a romance, that's the thing. I know this is a romance, but a lot of like Grace's sexual talk, or a lot of like her being too horny for her own good, kind of brought me out of like really cute fluffy scenes. But then other than that, I really did enjoy this book, and if I were to rate this book, it would be a 3.5 for those reasons. Grace being too horny for her own good, a lot of the sexual talk bringing out of like the fluffy scenes, a lot of the flashbacks. I really did enjoy this book. I do want to read more of her stuff. Other than that, that's all I find wrong are those three things. But I really did enjoy this book, and I love it. I love this book. I love Merrick. He's one of my favorites. Am I going to draw him? Maybe. I don't know. I don't know. The end of my review, and I will see you guys later. Bye.